Okay, let's get into the thick of things a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about specifics. So now we're actually sitting down in front of an opponent, and we know we're going to dream crush this guy.
Absolutely.
Because we're way better.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we wouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So what are some tips? Like, the first thing on the list, that's like a Drew thing.
Yeah, shuffle a lot.
Shuffle mucho.
Yeah, shuffle mucho. I have never gotten in trouble for shuffling too much. I think I might tend to err a little bit too much on the side of shuffling for too long. But, you know, I always make sure to do a couple mash shuffles, a couple bridge shuffles, like a pile shuffle or two, and then shuffle a little bit more. So, like I said, I've never had any issues with the amount of time that I shuffle, but I always like to make sure that, like, you know, I shuffle sufficiently. Yeah, especially if you get a deck check, because when they do a deck check on you, they will put your deck like in an order, like where it's like 4 of this card, 4 of this card, 4 of this card, 4 of this card, rather than like your deck being staggered because it's actually randomized. So then you really have to take the time and shuffle. Or if you organized your deck when you were registering it, again, because it's organized, you're going to have to shuffle. So it's not a terrible idea to shuffle a little bit before the match is even get posted, so that way you can know it's a little bit randomized. You don't have to spend as much time at the match shuffling your deck.
Cool, I totally agree. The next thing is always checking your sideboard like all the time.
Yeah.
And this is something I definitely do. Where not so like when I first sit down in front of an opponent, I take my deck box, take my deck out, and then I grab my sideboard. And I look through my sideboard and I make sure that it's 15 cards and that it's my 15 cards.
Yeah.
And this is something a lot of people don't know. Maybe they do know. I didn't know this for a while. But like if you look at your sideboard, you haven't shuffled, you're not presented, you're just sat down.
Yeah.
If you notice your sideboard is wrong, you forgot to unsideboard,
yeah,
you could just fix it.
Yeah.
Like you haven't presented your deck. You're not ready to play the game at all. You just fix the problem.
Yeah.
And then you keep going.
Yeah, it's not until you present your deck that's however you present your deck, that's what you're presenting and saying this is a legal deck. And if it's not a legal deck, then you can definitely get in trouble for that.
Yeah,
so yeah,
absolutely.
Check your sideboard. Make sure you've got 15 cards in your sideboard between games. That's something I always do.
Oh yeah.
Because like I'll take cards. Because sometimes when I'm sideboarding, because I'm much more of a like kind of sideboard on the fly kind of guy rather than a like I have this preset way of sideboarding the matchups. I just go like, I think this card is good. I think this card is good. Like I even did that at the trial. I'm like, I'm gonna take all my gut shots out versus the zombies player because gut shot is bad versus them. And then later I played him in another match because I played him in the Swiss and then I played him in the top 4. He had Blood Artist game 1, and I'm like, all right, so maybe I want a couple gut shots, so like I would leave some in. So I'm definitely much more of a kind of on the fly kind of sideboarder. But what that means is that like while I'm sitting there like taking cards out, putting cards in, I'll kind of be like doing a like shuffle of like in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out. So then after, once I'm like, okay, this is the deck I want, I'll like flip through and count, all right, yes, I have 15 cards, put it back in my deck box. So
awesome. I do the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really important. And yeah, it's just always important. I had this happen to me, against me in Denver, where some people will take their whole sideboard, shuffle it all into their deck,
yeah,
and take out 15. So you don't know how many they brought in or out.
Yeah.
This guy shuffled it all in and forgot to take out 15 cards. I presented it to me. And I noticed because I Jutaxian probed him on turn 1.
Yeah.
On game 2, and he had a Malira in his hand. And I was like, Malira? You brought that in against me? That's weird.
He's on the Grizzly Bear beatdown.
And then he was like, that is weird. And then he looks over at his deck box, and he flips it open, and there's no sideboard in his deck box. And he's like, oh, let me call Judge. Anyway, just make sure your sideboard, and especially because things like your sideboard are being wrong, or it's just like, those are really like dumb ways to get in trouble. Like, not dumb, but they're just like, really easy to avoid.
Yeah, just by doing very little things, you know, little maintenance, upkeep. I don't know what the word is you would say, but very little, you know, things you have to do between games and matches to make sure your deck is correct when you're presenting it. So
okay, so we sat down, we shuffled, checked our sideboard. It's good. Presented it. They cut it. We lost the die roll. Dang it!
Doesn't matter.
So now
I always make sure to play deck deck when on the draw.
Oh really?
That's actually true. A lot of times when I'm testing, I'm like, this deck better be able to win on the draw because I don't win a lot of dice rolls. So
because you have bad luck.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you handle the whole like? Do you like draw your hand and look at it and he looks at it and go, or do you wait for him, or how do you do it?
No. So when I'm shuffled. Okay, so like let's go through like my steps. Like let's say I'm sitting down versus an opponent. So I'll shuffle. Thanks. I'll take the 3 minutes Drew shuffle or whatever you want to call it.
20 minutes.
It's forever.
Oh.
And then I'll present my deck, and his deck will have been presented because he probably took less time than me shuffling. So then I'll shuffle his deck. I won't shuffle my opponent's deck as much as I shuffled my deck. But I'll definitely I'll do some. They call them mash shuffles. You just take it and kind of,
Would you like to show the world?
Yeah, I can show. So a mash shuffle is just where you take it and you split it and you do that. That's like a mash shuffle. Pretty easy. So you just do that, and then
now can you make a fan between your hands?
No, not that good. So I'll just sit here do a couple mash shuffles. I might do a bridge shuffle. The problem obviously is when I'm doing that, and always make sure you're looking away because you don't want it. You don't want to see your opponent's stuff. So I am always kind of doing this whenever I'm shuffling. So that way there's no confusion that I'm not, I can't see what's in my opponent's deck.
Yeah.
So sleeves are pointed away. I'm doing a couple mash shuffles, that kind of a thing, and then I'll give them their deck back. So because you always want to shuffle your opponent's deck. I try to be a little bit more careful with my opponent's deck than my deck when I'm shuffling because it is their cards. They may have foils. Maybe they've got 4 foil Snapcasters, 4 foil Delvers, 4 foil guys. You don't know, right? You don't know what's in their deck or whatever. So you want to be careful because it is someone else's cards that they invested in, and they want to keep their cards in the condition. My cards get a little beat up even when they're in sleeves, but they're my cards, so I do with them what I will. Then once they presented. So then let's say this is my deck, so we've presented, we've shuffled, we've given each other's decks back. I will spread out 7 cards, and let's assume I lost the dice roll, I will win. So my opponent will look at his 7 cards, and he'll decide, do I want to keep this hand or do I not? So he'll sit there and think, and I will just sit here. I won't look at my hand. There's a couple reasons for this. One is it won't give my opponent any information while he's deciding to mulligan. He'll have no idea what's in my hand. Let's say he's, is that a really famous poker player?
David Williams.
Well, he's kind of a Magic poker player. I was thinking who is it? We'll just say Doyle Brunson. That's the one I can think of right now. Let's say my opponent's Doyle Brunson-esque. He's really good at reading tells, right? He can totally tell when I've got a good hand or a bad hand. So I don't want to give him any extra information when he decides to mulligan or not. So he looks at his hand and he's like, yeah, I'm going to mulligan. So I go, okay. So then I look at my hand. I think to myself, yes, this hand is good, so I'm going to keep it. So then once I decide to keep, I just go ahead and put my hand. I might look through it and think through what my plays are going to be. I'm going to do this on this turn. I'm going to do this on that turn. I'm going to do this, whatever. And then I'll probably, once I've kind of thought through the hand for a couple seconds, I'll just put it back down, generally. So I won't necessarily look at it. Whatever you do, it's not a big deal. But I just don't look at it again because I'm doesn't matter because those are the cards that I chose to stuck with. He'll shuffle, I'll present it back, he'll decide. But let's say I do decide to mulligan. Again, we go back to shuffling. Present.
20 minutes later.
Yeah, 20 minutes later, the match is over. Drew got a match loss for taking forever to shuffle.
Now, when you watch them, do you do the Conley stare?
Like what?
Like in Worlds, where he's like... It's pretty intense.
I don't really do that as
Remember
much.
that in Worlds?
Yeah, where he just sat there and he just stared at his opponent or whatever, where he's trying to get the read. Yeah.
Stone Cold Nuts, man.
Yeah, I don't pay as much
Tempered Steel.
I don't pay as much attention to my opponents as maybe I should. I do kind of, but generally I just try and stay really focused on my game.
Sometimes it's really easy, right? Because they'll draw their opener and they'll look and they'll be like, oh.
Yeah, where they're giving it away.
And they're like, I guess I'll keep this. And you're like, oh, well then I'm mulligan.
Yeah. So that's basically how I do that for presenting for mulligans and stuff. So you just want to try and minimize the amount of information you give your opponent and all that. So.
Cool. Okay. So now we're playing. Let's get back this one. So now we're playing Delver.
Yeah.
And we just taxi and probe on turn 1 because
yeah.
we're the best. So you just look at it and then you say, okay, and you pick them back up. You write them down.
Absolutely
right?
not. You write it down.
Write them down.
Write them down. So the way you do this is you go, okay, what's in your hand? Let's say you play cards like Jataxian Probe or Thoughtseize or something like that in Modern. And they go, here's my hand. And you go, okay, you've got one of this. You write down this. And you can use shorthand. Instead of writing Augur of Bolus, you just write Augur. And instead of writing Vapor Snag, you write Snag. Or however it is. Whatever your shorthand is, doesn't matter as long as you understand what the card is that you're writing down. So you write down each card in their hand. Then what you do is when it's their turn or whatever it is, once they start playing cards, cross out when they play the card in their hand. So that way you will know what cards are left in their hand And that way you can decide, what do I need to do, like in this situation, or can I make this play based on the knowledge I have of the cards in their hand?
Yeah, I messed this up yesterday when I lost my game.
Yeah.
No, that was actually on Friday, where I wrote down the guy's hand, and he had a bonfire.
Yeah.
And there was a point where he had 5 lands.
Yeah.
And I just played a Geist Saint Trap,
Yeah.
Delver.
Yeah.
And then I passed, and he bonfired for 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, dang it, I wish I would have known.
See, I'm good, because I did the opposite of that at the Grand Prix trial versus Aaron.
Really?
Yeah, versus Aaron Maranaka. I attacked him, told him, you have a bonfire. And I had a Pike out. Oh, no, I had a Snapcaster out, right? And I'm like, I could play my Geist and my Delver because I know the top card of my deck is an instant because I just pondered. And I'm like, oh, wait, you're just going to bonfire, aren't you? Let's not do that. Yeah, so, definitely knowing what is in their hand and making sure to keep track of it. Sometimes I'm bad about that. Sometimes I won't cross it off, but it's something that you should.
And then you look back at your notes and you're like, 12-4, I should look at their hand. 4.
Yeah. So definitely it's something good to keep track of because having that information advantage can be huge.
Okay. So now we've taken a couple turns back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
We're winning, of course, because we're the best.
Yep.
But how often? I know that one of the things that I told people in my first video was that it's important to, in a general sense, you should probably attack before you do things during your main phase.
Generally,
in kind of an overall
Yeah.
setting, like playing a land or playing another creature or something kind of like that.
Yeah. Generally, you want to wait to play your land or your spells or your creatures that in your main phase after your combat phase. So you want to do it in your second main phase. And the reason for that is because your opponent gets less information. So let's say I'm like, all right, I'm going to attack you with my 3/3. And let's say they've got a 3/3 of their own. And they're like, do I want to block? Because I really want to attack with my 3/3 because I feel like me attacking, I can push the advantage for whatever reason. And they go, I'm not going to block because for whatever reason that they decide. And you go, I'm going to play a 3/4 on my second main phase. Go. And now all of a sudden they're like, well, now I can't attack. If you had done it in the opposite order, so let's say you play the 3/4 and then you go, I'm going to attack with my 3/3, they might be more inclined to block your 3/3, right? Because they know they can't attack their 3/3 into your new 3/4. So I think that's a really good basic example of why you want to do stuff after, because it gives your opponent the chance to less information, so that way their decision, it's more difficult for them to make the correct decision when they're blocking or if they're using a removal spell. For example, let's say I'm playing versus zombies. This situation comes up a lot. And let's say they're like, all right, I've got a Gravecrawler, and I'm attacking with my Gravecrawler, and it's their turn 3, and they haven't played a land, so they've got 2 swamps out. And I'm like, and I've got a Celestial Purge in my hand, and I've got 2 lands. So I'm like, do I want to Celestial Purge the Gravecrawler? It saves me 2 damage, and it does get rid of one of their more annoying threats, but I really need to be able to purge their messengers, right? I really need to be able to stop their messenger because that guy's the brick house. But maybe he doesn't have a land. Maybe he doesn't have the messenger. I don't know, right? As the player having to make the decision in combat whether to deal with that Gravecrawler or not, I just don't have that information available to me because my opponent didn't play their land and didn't play their creature. Whereas if they had just gone first main phase, play my 3rd swamp, play a Geralf's Messenger, attack you with my Gravecrawler, now I'm just going to purge the messenger, right? But instead I have to make the decision, and if they don't have the messenger, they snuck in 2 points of damage. So you definitely get, I think, most of the time a good advantage out of attacking first and then playing stuff.
Awesome, that makes sense. What about things I've seen pro players do this? I've seen you do it. I do it too sometimes, which is maybe I've got 3 cards in my hand and it's turn 10 or something, and I draw a land and I don't play the land for the turn.
Yeah. So
why would you not do that?
Well, the reason is because most decks you're going to hit a point where you don't need any more land, right? Honestly, most decks, what are you going to do with 10 land in play? Some decks...
awesome. Triple more than huh?
Triple, you only need 9.
Shoot. And a Vapor Snag?
Ooh.
It was a big turn.
That's a really big turn. But, some decks can make use of 10 mana. These tend to be decks with, X spells in them. So decks that maybe play Keswick Wolf Run is a good example in Standard. But a lot of decks, like Delver, don't really have a lot to do once you have, 8 or 9 lands in play.
I've noticed Delver peaks right around 6 or 7.
Yeah,
like, wow, I'm not
yeah.
using
I mean,
all this.
sometimes there are maybe some really weird situations where you need like 8 lands. There's actually one situation where I actually did need 8 lands in play, but that involved me like being able to cast a Talrand, pay for a mana leak, and then still have a mana to play a spell so I could get a Talrand trigger. So those kind of really weird corner cases where you're like, you know, I would need the extra land. But like, for example, let's say I've got here, we'll just use this deck. Like, let's say I've got a Cameo out.
And you're good.
And I've got another
nothing.
Do you have any other permanents in this deck? All right, I've got an Izzet Keyword. I don't know. And then let's say I have a whole bunch of lands. Like I have like, oh man, look at all these lands I've drawn this game.
So many.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I've got 9 lands. Let's say I have no cards in my hand. So for whatever reasons, I played out all my spells and I really needed these 9 lands. And then I go draw, and I draw. Oh, look at that! I did draw a land. So I draw a land for my turn. Why would I not play the land? Well, because I don't need the land, right? Like, what am I going to do with the mana with these cards? Nothing, right? Like, I can use the Cameo ability without paying mana. This only costs me 2 mana to use this cool key room thing. So, in fact, there's even an advantage for holding a land because I can discard them to draw cards.
Right?
But let's say that doesn't happen. So I only need 2 lands to use this, 2 mana to use this, and I don't need any mana for this. The advantage of me having the land in his hand means my opponent doesn't know what this card is. Maybe I drew a Syncopate, right? The new card from Return to Ravnica. So maybe I have a counterspell and I have all this land. So now I can actually counter whatever they play. Maybe I drew, I don't know, what's another good like instant, a Snapcaster, right? Like maybe I drew a Snapcaster and I've got some sweet removal spell in my graveyard, like an Izzet Charm. So I drew a Snapcaster and I've got an Izzet Charm. My opponent doesn't know that, right? Like they go, oh, like, if I do this and he drew that card, is it bad? Whereas if I just draw the land and I just go, and I'm upset and I want tilt because I go on tilt sometimes.
Never.
And I go. Now my opponent knows, hey, all he's got is this key rune and this Cameo. I don't need to worry about the card in his hand. So it's just a way for you to get a little bit more of an edge against, opponents for virtually no cost. Because me playing this land or me not playing this land isn't really going to matter. Whatever I draw with this combination of lands, I'm thinking, right? Yeah, I've got 3 white sources. I've got plenty of red sources, plenty of blue sources. I don't need any more lands. I don't need any more mana. It doesn't matter if I have this land in play or not. So, I will generally, with the land thing, I will generally play until I have 1 land left in my hand. Because I did run into a situation once where I was mana flooded. I was a little bit on tilt. That's another thing. Don't go on tilt.
Right.
And I had 3 lands in my hand, and I just sat on the 3 lands for forever. And this is actually a 2-headed giant game, so it's a really weird case where my opponent drew a card drawing spell, or my partner. My partner drew a card drawing spell. We knew we needed one of the cards out of my deck, and it was a card drawing spell that targeted a player. So he targeted me, I drew the cards, and then realized I actually needed like 9 lands or something like that to be able to play multiple spells in the turn, and I couldn't do it, and we ended up going to time and drawing, whereas if I would have been able to play both the spells, we would have won. So because of that experience, generally I will play down until I only have 1 land left in my hand.
So, for example, if your next draw was also a land,
yeah,
maybe then you play one.
So I go, okay, so we'll assume that's a land. I would go, all right, I'll play my land, go, and hold on to the 1 land. Because, and this is another thing to think about too. Like, let's say you're playing the new X spell in the deck, the gain X, draw X cards. Even if I hold this land, let's say the top card is the X spell, so I'm like holding this land, I'm like, I'm going to hold this land. Oh, I drew the X spell. You can still play your land because you haven't played a land for the turn, and then cast the X spell, right? Because like you're still going to get the maximum amount that you would have got anyways. So yeah, I think holding on to 1 land is generally perfectly okay. Sometimes if you like are comfortable enough with your deck, you might want to hold on to 2 or 3. I know there was a limited game where I got really terribly mana flooded. I literally drew 3 spells and like 12 lands. Like that game.
Well done.
I lost that game, but the point is, I ended up holding 3 or 4 lands, and my opponent was so scared of what I had, they thought I had like a rebuke or whatever, so they wouldn't attack with like their 4/4 flyer. It just like sat there, and they never attacked with it, and I was just like, go, 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 and they probably gave me like an extra 3 or 4 turns to like draw spells. So just the value of holding the card in your hand, not allowing your opponent to have information, is just a little thing that you can do. So
awesome, that's cool. So the next thing I want to talk about is being adaptive and being unpredictable a little bit.
Yeah.
I have my own little story for this one. So like when I was first learning, I'm still learning, right? But when I was really newer to Magic and to Delver, I would just mirror, because I played with Josh Snow all the time, right?
Yeah.
This was before I really knew you even. And I would just mirror whatever he did.
Mm-hmm.
And so like there was a time when he would play Snapcasters a lot at the end of your turn.
Right.
Again, the Delver mirror. This is before Restoration Angel.
Yeah.
He plays Snapcaster to gain some extra damage.
Mm-hmm.
So he did it, so I just started doing it. Every end of turn, Snapcaster.
Yeah.
Just do it all the time. Then he stopped doing it, so I stopped doing it. And I would just mirror what he did. I would just do what he did. And then there was one game during a win-a-box where, and this is the time where we weren't doing that, right? We weren't doing that, whatever.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I realized, hey, like my hand is stacked. I don't have really any spells. This would be a really good time to flash in this Snapcaster maybe start getting some damage on this guy.
Yeah.
And then I stopped, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just thought for myself. Like, I know it sounds so dumb, but like I was like, I'm going to be unpredictable. I don't usually do this. Like, I'm going to flash in this Snapcaster Mage. I'm going to start beating your face in with it. Like, and it was because it made sense to do it at that time. And just being able to think like that and to be able to go, okay, like and analyze and go, Snapcaster, you almost always save it to cast a spell from your graveyard. Like,
right.
Obviously, like, almost always. But there was a time where it was like, oh, this actually makes sense. I'm actually just going to bring this in and beat with it because that makes sense to do it at this time. And just being unpredictable like that can really throw your opponent off. And can really, it also I think gives you a better game in general.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, it's not like you shouldn't play mechanically sound. Of course you should.
Right.
But you just have to be ready to be adaptive and to be adaptive to what they're doing as well. And be able to react to whatever it is that they throw at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, being able to like think through why you need to make certain plays and stuff, like why, like what's the value of this card or that card or whatever, and like, am I okay losing a game, not losing a game, but losing a spell later on in the game when I cast this Snapcaster on turn 2 to try and get in there early. It's definitely something you need to think about. I actually remember that was happening at the trial where like. Generally, I would think in the Zombies mirror match, you don't want to vapor snag your own guys because it's such a like brutal tempo-oriented game. Mm-hmm. But like every single situation, I would like block with a Snapcaster, and then like he would do something like use a removal spell, and I'm like, I think it's correct for me to vapor snag my own Snapcaster, like, which is generally correct versus the control decks because you want to use snags as a way to save your threats versus the control decks. But in the zombie matchup, like. You're taking a point of damage for snagging your guy, you're losing tempo, et cetera, but just the way the hand matched up, I'm like, I think it's correct for me to bounce my own Snapcasters, and continue being able to replay the Snapcasters. So, yeah, like, being able to think through, like, what do I need to do, in these specific situations or whatever, and doing that is very good. But, yeah, I definitely think, number one, I think you need to focus on playing technically correct.
Yeah, that's definitely I mean, you can't... I mean, what you said, and Chapin said it really well, and I think I read the same. I have his book as well.
Yeah.
People say a lot that like you shouldn't try and do things like try and be super like Jedi mind tricks and try and trick your opponent and do all this stuff and just playing around the rules almost or whatever.
Yeah. You
just need to play solid, and you just need to make the right play at the right time. You need to never miss any triggers.
Yeah.
You just need to always use your mana to the best. To just play it right.
Yeah, playing technically correct is the number one thing you should work on.
Absolutely.
Once you get to the point where you are a mainstay on the Pro Tour, then hey man, go at it and like try and be like tricky and stuff with your plays. But that's something I'm constantly trying to improve my technical play.
Absolutely.
Because I've got ways to go. I've still got miles to go in terms of like improving my technical play. Like there's. Every single game I will sit there and think like after the game I'll be like, did I do this right? Did I do that right? And like so focus on that. Number one, if you focus on that, you will see your game. You will see a marked improvement in your performance. I think in playing your matches and playing in tournaments over any other way. Over trying to be tricky with your opponents. Over trying to be tricky with like your plays or your cards or anything like that. Just try and play technically correct.
I totally agree. And speaking of technically correct, one really important thing to know is like your triggers.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is also important because with the new player's guide, the new IPG, the new infraction and procedures guide.
Yeah.
You now at a competitive level tournament, you have to announce every trigger.
Yeah.
You have to declare them all. Like, if you attack with something, you have to declare, and it gets exalted from here, or just by saying exalted and tapping on like your cathedral or whatever.
Yeah.
But a really important place to understand your triggers is in something like flipping a Delver, because people even still people don't really get when that happens and how they can respond to it.
Yeah.
So we both had situations where like, I'll like untap, and then I'll say trigger Delver, and they'll be like okay, and think the Delver mirror I do this, and then I'll look and I'll go Thought Scour, flipping, and they're like gut shot in response, and it's way too late.
Yeah, because the way abilities happen in Magic, or the way spells and abilities, so there's like text, right, for like a spell, or there's text for an ability, and it says like blah 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 blah. When if a spell or an ability resolves, so when it means resolves, it means it's happening. It all happens at once. So like if I play, so like a Delver trigger, there's two sentences, right? There's 2 lines where it says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may look at the top card of your deck. So you look at the top card of your deck. If it's an instant or a sorcery, you may reveal it, and if you do, you transform Delver of Secret. That's one ability, and it all resolves at once. You can't interrupt an ability between sentences, is the best way to think of it as.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so once it happens, you read the whole thing, and nothing can happen. Now, you can put the ability on the stack. You can say, all right, so the Delver trigger, so the whole thing is on the stack. Your opponent has a chance to respond to that. Even you, as the active player, have a chance to do stuff with that trigger on the stack. If you both pass priority, though, you go look at. As soon as you're looking at the top card, your ability is resolving, and nothing can happen in the interim. So yeah, you can't gut shot it once like you reveal the card, because it's all resolving at once. So yeah, the best way to think of it as when a spell or an ability resolves, if you say, okay, this thing is going to happen, that I'm okay with this thing happening, the whole thing happens at once. Not one part and then another part. It's just think of it as like, you're reading a paragraph and you have to read the paragraph all at once.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to know that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
really important to know. I think really good, also understanding triggers are things, this isn't as relevant anymore because it's rotating at the standard, but one of the biggest things I would do against Birthing Pod decks is they would go like turn 3 Birthing Pod, and I'd say okay, and then they would go turn 4, play Blade Splicer.
Right.
And they'd play the Blade Splicer, and I would always say, I'll respond to the trigger of the Golem.
Right.
Right? Because that Golem, like they're putting the 3/3 into play, that's a trigger. So Blade Splicer goes, Golem goes on the stack, and I'll just gut shot your Blade Splicer. Yeah. And now they can't use Birthing Pod on the Blade Splicer.
Yeah, well, because Birthing Pod is a sorcery ability. Right. But you can't gut shot of birds.
Right, but if they're birds, too late.
Yeah, and it's also understanding the rules, because like once the birds resolves, then they have priority again. There's no triggered ability with birds or anything like that. So once they have priority, they can activate Birthing Pod. There's literally no way for you to interrupt them having a Birthing Pod in play, playing a birds, and you having a gut shot. You can't interrupt the Birthing Pod from happening. Exactly. Which is, again, it's just understanding how the rules work. So once you get a little bit keener grasp on it, you'll be able to see those kind of tricky plays with the Blade Splicer thing. But just understanding when a trigger happens, do it all at once. Like you were saying, keep track of your triggers. Make sure to do them. Like, make sure, all right, I'm doing this thing. This needs to happen with the trigger or whatever. Yeah. I had a guy play Liliana Shade versus me at a COPTQ in Boise, and he just didn't search first one. So just totally forgot. Little things like that, just make sure you do that. Because, again, if you focus on that aspect of it, you will, again, you'll see an improvement in your play. Keeping track of that stuff is absolutely vitally important. So.
Definitely. I want to go off on what you said about, knowing the rules a little bit. And then I think it's really important to be able to have a good understanding of the rules. As players, you need to know almost as well as judges. Yeah. I mean, and it's not so that you can tell someone how it works during the game. That's not the purpose of knowing the rules. It's being able to understand things like that Blade Splicer thing. Yeah. And there are a lot of other rules, things like that, where being able to understand when you can do something, how it will interact with the board because of the rules involved. Yeah. Allow you to make better plays. Yeah. Like I've done it once before where somebody cast a Restoration Angel and they had an image and they had a not Thractos, that'd be dumb. And they had a something else like a Huntmaster in play with no other token. Yeah. And he cast the Angel and I responded by favor snagging the Huntmaster because then he had to target the image. Anyway, just little things like that, like knowing how those rules interact so that you can capitalize on your plays. Yeah, exactly. So you can it's so you can understand how to play the game better, not how to rules lawyer your opponent. No, yeah, you don't. Yeah. Who I can't remember who said it, but someone said Magic isn't a game of gotcha.
Yeah.
Because it's true, you're not trying to catch them in like this. You're just trying to play the game to the best of your ability.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing we have on the list is going on tilt.
Yeah, don't go on tilt.
Never do.
Yeah, I try and avoid doing that. Unfortunately, I think everyone gets bit a little bit occasionally by it. But yeah, try and stay as calm and collected as you can. Going on tilt, you will play worse. You'll get in your head more. You just have to stay calm and focused on what you're doing. So yeah, definitely try and avoid doing that.